Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are here today to talk about the 1983 spy film directed by Empire Strikes Back's own Irving Kershner, which is pretty cool. Never Say Never Again with Sean Connery returning. It's no coincidence that we played that intro again. It feels almost like we've come full circle with this thing.
Yeah.
As we've mentioned, the retrospective's done now. We're kind of doing the little side projects. Last week we did the 1960s Casino Royale. And this was the big one. This was the film that went toe to toe with Octopussy back in the day in 1983. And it's been one that I've been intrigued by. It's always been like the outlier. It's sort of like the second cousin, so many times removed of the Bond family, with a very interesting, legally complicated history, which we'll try and touch on a little bit. But if you want to go in depth into it, there's articles, Wikipedia alone. You can get lost down a rabbit hole with everything that went on with this film. And as we were chatting before we did this intro, arguably the return of the definitive James Bond, playing the character again, but we can't class it as part of the canon Eon films because this is definitely not an Eon film. It's very complicated. We're going to get into it, but before we do so, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So, comment your thoughts on Never Say Never Again. This is a film that is very interesting. Obviously, this and Casino Royale are the outcasts of the series, and I think this is the one most people would have seen if they've seen any of the two. I think actually a lot more people have seen this. This is part of the ITV brigade and all that kind of stuff. So, comment your thoughts, hit the like button, do subscribe. We've got a lot more things coming on the way. As you said, the Bond retrospective is over. You can check all them out in the playlist, but we've got it in the link in the description. Loads of stuff there. And of course, we are doing other Bond related things as the weeks go by. So, next week begins Austin Powers. Just to say it there. So we're calling it Bond content, but it's going to dip in and out. But obviously, there's no Austin Powers like James Bond. So do stick around with us. Hit that subscribe button. And if you are new to the channel, if you don't really know what we do, of course, we're a film channel. We don't just do older films, we do new ones too, TV stuff. November's going to be a hell of a month. We've put a lot of tweets out yesterday going over our content. That's at cinema_savvy. Go over, check of all of that. We're going to find out what we've got planned. But off the top of our head, we've got the Peter Jackson retrospective. We've got Spider-Man films coming up. We've got Ghostbusters films coming up. We've got new films coming up. We've got these films. There's so much happening on this channel this month and next month that 2021 is going to end the way it started, of just chaos. So hit us up on the social medias. You'll find out what videos are coming up and when they are. Letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. We've put a Bond top 10 ranking on there now as well, so you can have a look at that. But yeah, it's shaping up for a crazy few weeks, and it's kind of exciting, I want to say, about doing Bond. That I'm just going to make a really quick point. So I'm glad we got Casino Royale and this out the way first before it's going to really kick off. Not derogatory comments about these two I'm going to add, but Austin Powers, it's an hour and a half. You can get in and out pretty quickly, and there's three of them, not 2 hours 10 and 2 hours 10.
Yeah, this was another 2-hour 10 one, wasn't it? Which I was hoping it wouldn't be. But is this shorter or longer, or kind of on par with Thunderball's runtime? Because Thunderball feels longer.
On par.
Yeah,
there's no 15-minute underwater fight in this.
No,
film.
thank Christ. There's only one in this film, thankfully. But we did our rankings video, and a lot of people really like Thunderball. I can't say whether I prefer this film to Thunderball just yet. I am probably going to have to rewatch Thunderball in that very sad Sunday afternoon. That will probably be when I have to rewatch that film. But yeah, I mean, the plot for this thing: a Spectre agent has stolen 2 American nuclear warheads, and James Bond must find the targets before they are detonated. And if that plot sounds familiar, it's because it's exactly the same plot as Thunderball, which is no coincidence. So I guess that will sort of, we'll get into the review a little bit now. So, well, actually, thoughts before going in. As I mentioned, this is one that you hear come up in conversation a lot of times, and I think I mentioned this last week when we did Casino Royale, but my parents are a lot older. They're in their 70s now, and they don't understand like side projects or like different continuities or reboots and things like that. They just thought it was all part of a franchise. So, listing off all the Connery James Bond films, they said, oh, he did Never Say Never Again as well. I'm like, yeah, he did. And he played James Bond, but it's not part of the Eon films, and the look of visible confusion on their faces, they just couldn't grasp that. So it always felt, growing up when it was mentioned, it felt like the weird outlier film, which is kind of what it is. And, doing this retrospective, reading up on each film week to week, like I didn't know this went toe to toe with Octopussy, which is a very bold thing to do. And I think we had this conversation either when we were planning to do this film or probably at the time we did Octopussy. We were trying to think of another situation where you've got a character or like a property, something so popular as James Bond, where there's two films done by two different companies released side by side. And I think the only thing that we could kind of think of was like what's going to be happening with Batman. You know, you're going to have Michael Keaton and Ben Affleck in the Flash movie. And also you've got the Robert Pattinson Batman trilogy. So that's going to be running side by side. But that's inherently from the same company. That all comes from the same place. But I mean, I can't think of another example, not off the top of my head anyway. Maybe there is something out there where you had two very similar films come out around the same time.
I can think of carbon copy films that say there was. I mean, it's a bit different because they're not established, but White House Down came out the same year as Olympus Has Fallen.
Yeah.
And Olympus Has Fallen made more money. It came out first, but White House Down was so much better. But no one cared or saw it because they'd just done a film.
I can think of like Bugs Life and Ants, when you had two different animation companies based on insects. Like that was something, but when it's the same character and like a same actor that has played the character, it feels like a very, very unique situation to me with this film.
I feel like a film has done it and it's escaping the top of my head, and I'm really struggling because it's going to be something really obvious when it comes back to me. But it's a really interesting predicament, and I think the Batman conversation is spot on. I can't really say Spider-Man, but you can really look into how there was 3 Spider-Men in the space of 9 years, and things like that, and we're going to get hopefully all 3 are going to be on the screen in December. We're 99.99% sure they are. Thanks, online. But yeah, it's just the entire concept, and I think sort of going to. I saw this as a kid, and I've only ever seen this one once before this weekend, and it's more of a, the ITV. It was shown on ITV at some point in my childhood. I just remember seeing, oh, this isn't Thunderball, but this is a bit like Thunderball, and it's got Sean Connery. And I don't really understand it until I got a bit older. And then it would have been when the 50th anniversary box set came out, when I was obviously into Bond a lot more. And I realized that, oh, that never actually counted. But it's got Sean Connery still playing James Bond, but it's a remake. And yeah, it was a really weird thing to discover, because normally you don't get cast members going off to do unofficial remakes, reboots, sequels of their franchises. Imagine like a Tobey Maguire's, I'm just going to redo Spider-Man 1 like 20 years later. But what? Like how it comes to be is I guess the biggest question. And the Bond franchise we've spoken about is just riddled with financial issues, rights issues, all this kind of stuff that's kind of died in the last 10 years. I know, obviously, when Sony helped merge it and all that stuff, but I'm even going to go to the box set behind me. I don't know if you're aware of the famous story that Eon was sued, and the court case went on for a couple of years. When it first came out, they called it the Complete James Bond Collection or something like that.
Right.
And there was a court case that went on for many years because some woman in America sued them because it did not include Casino Royale 1967 and Never Say Never Again. And she eventually won. Even after appeals, she still won. And they had to legally say they couldn't call it like the Complete Bond box set. There's a really good article for people who want to know more on Film Stories Pod. And it blew my mind reading it, because, how on earth can that happen? But it's amazing to read about it. But this was someone that said it's not complete because there are 2 James Bond films not in it. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong.
She's got a point, but I mean, was this just like a random woman off the street?
Yeah,
just like average Joe kind of. I mean, she clearly had a lot of free time on her hands and a lot of money as well, because I know that legal fees in the US are, are not cheap. They're definitely not cheap, but I can see a point. She'd probably be there complaining that they didn't include that like hour TV special that they did. The one in black and white as well. Just throw them all in there. Why not? But yeah, this was actually the first time that I watched this film. So that was a thing for me. Going back to like the old way of things, like last week with Casino Royale and this one, it was nice to be watching sort of new James Bond content again, getting back into the swing of things with it. But yeah, this one is incredibly complicated with many legal issues, which have only been kind of resolved around the time that Spectre came out, I think, or a little bit before. Certainly in the pre-production for that film, obviously. So back in the day, this was in the 60s. We're going way, way back with this one. We're almost going back to the start. Fleming worked alongside some independent producers on trying to get a James Bond film script or story together. And he worked with a guy called Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham. And I think the script was called something like Longitude 78 West or something like that, I think it was called. However, when he came to writing, I think it was abandoned because the costs would have been too much or something. Eventually, Fleming obviously wrote Thunderball, made the fatal error of not crediting McClory and Whittingham. Now, take that for what you will. Who was in the right? Was he justified to go with it on his own if everyone else abandoned it, or should he have given the credit there? But it seems like Whittingham just kind of dropped it. Like he was fine with it because his name's never mentioned a lot, really. I don't know if he died or something. I should probably have researched that. Maybe that's why we never heard from him. But the one guy that wouldn't let it go for decades, Kevin McClory. And that's a name that's going to crop up loads. Find you a man who's as dedicated as Kevin McClory is to the goddamn Thunderball idea, because he just wouldn't let this thing go. And again, whether you think he was justified or not to let it go, went to court. Obviously, he didn't win. Thunderball goes ahead, and I think an injunction was put in place where he couldn't make anything related with James Bond or Thunderball for 10 years after that point. Took another crack at it in the 70s, I think, with a film that he wanted to be called. I think it was going to be the same film. It was going to be called Warhead. I think Richard Burton was in talks to play Bond. Orson Welles, again, from last week, playing Le Chiffre, was going to be playing Blofeld. All these ideas that never materialized. I think there were more legal battles and everything like that. And I think even down to the 80s, even before this film was coming out, I think Eon kind of did one last charge to try and crush this movie from being made, but they lost it, and copyright of the characters of Blofeld and Spectre obviously were given to McClory. And after seeing this film, I'm like, you fought for decades, literal decades, like over 20 years for this, and this is the result. And was it worth it? And I'll let you guys be the decider of that. For me, it's not worth it. It feels like a retread, because it fundamentally is. It's exactly the same stuff, and that was part of the limitations as well that Eon fought for. I think that McClory wanted to add like loads of different things into the plot and make it into something almost completely different, but then the grounds of copyright were like, nah, you've got to make it basically Thunderball. You are limited to the Thunderball plot, and that's basically what we got with this film. So it's way more involved with that, with a lot more names, a lot more producers, and a lot more money and different factions on all sides and everything. But essentially, this film was a mess for decades. And the fact that this film even got made is a miracle in and of itself. But what's your takeaway on it? Do you think that McClory was justified in fighting for what he believed in, fighting for that story that he made back in the 60s? Or do you think along the way, he should have just let it go?
I'm going to take my Bond bias out and say, if it's his story, he has every right to chase the credit and whatnot. Now, there's extremes of it, and have I been in that situation? Obviously, I don't know how I'd react. I'd probably be as petty because it's me. It's such a tough one because there's spending decades of your life committed to a cause, and it's essentially, I don't know at what point it reaches boiling points of middle fingers, but when you start to bring in people like Sean Connery, who we'll get to. And it's kind of there, like, getting Irving Kershner in as well, post Empire Strikes Back as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this really weird accumulation, again, all down to, copywriting. And I'd be inclined to say that, again, I don't know the ins and outs, but the story side of it, absolutely, the idea's been there on a script on paper and you've nabbed it, put it in a book and said it's yours when it wasn't. I don't know how that sort of thing lands and how it would have fired back then, especially. I think nowadays it's easier for stuff like that. When you see like copyrighted scripts, it has written by over every single page, so things like this can never happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting. But to end up with a remake, and let's be honest, the title's Never Say Never Again. It was Sean Connery's wife's idea for the name. It is a middle finger to Eon. I know that he fell out of Cubby, of course, but how this is a film is beyond my comprehension. And that's not a criticism of the film. That is more just of how extreme this situation became, that we get a film as an outcome. And the film itself, as my initial in, I just think is very average. It reminds me of the normal Thunderball. I know some people really enjoy it, but I'm not a massive fan of Thunderball. And I think by far and away the best character is I've forgotten her name.
Fiona Volpe.
Fiona Volpe, yeah. And you don't get a recast of Fiona Volpe. I think there's a bit of respect there, and they renamed to Fatima Bush, I think it is. But it's like a case study, isn't it? Like, this is the kind of shit we should have been like doing at uni in school. Like, how did this film get made? And I think it was Scott from Spire just tweeting this earlier today, and he said he's in the camp that thinks this is better than Thunderball, and I'm not inclined to agree nor disagree. I think they're about. I mean, I think I said it to you as well. I think they're about on par with each other. That each one has some things that are all right. Each one has some things that essentially, yes, it's the same story, but part of me wants to say it was really nice to see Sean Connery going about being Bond again. But was it? I don't know.
I still think he's better in this than he is in Diamonds Are Forever. I will say that.
Yes, I will say that. No, I'll agree with you on that. He's better in this. Just having him back. But there's just so many things that are so odd. And I think Aid said might have done a really good episode on that. I think the writers or some people involved at the time that there's a lot of issues on set with the film as well. Yep. There was some dramas. I don't know it was the writers or producers, but
it was the producer. Yeah. Jack Schwartzman, apparently, I think Irving Kershner didn't get on with him, so there was tension there. I think Irving Kershner said something like, he's a great businessman, but he felt like he was the wrong choice as a producer for this. He felt like he was out of his depth to be a movie producer on a film of this scale as well. And I think Sean Connery just would outright blank him on set as well. So there was definitely tension there with the producer for whatever reason. I think it went way over budget. I think the producer had it didn't realize that the film was going to cost as much as he did. They ran out of money, and then Schwartzman had to sort of like finish the film. He was out of pocket, basically. He just had to pay the remainder himself out of his own wages. So, yeah, it's just all a bit of a mess. Even the director, like I think Irving Kershner, I don't know if he came on late in the game, but I think they originally wanted Richard Donner, who did Superman the movie and Superman 2. Oh, actually, no, he didn't do Superman 2. Take that back. He did Superman the movie, a bunch of other films as well, but they went with Kershner. Kershner's career is so interesting to look at. Dude made Empire Strikes Back, and actually, I think when that came out, it wasn't well regarded, was it? I think it was. I don't know if it was negative criticism, but I think it was quite lukewarm. Obviously, now it's lauded as one of the best films of all time.
Like The Last Jedi. It's very similar. Very similar.
Moving on. But right after this, like he did this, and then there was like a 7-year gap, and he made RoboCop 2, and that was it. So it's a very interesting 2 films afterwards.
He was George Lucas's, I want to say, film lecturer or something along those lines. He was involved with George Lucas when he was younger at college. Without turning into a Star Wars discussion, which we usually could do, but the whole Lucas doesn't trust people, he doesn't trust big corporations, all that kind of stuff we know about. Irving Kershner was who he wanted for Empire. And I want to really add to this. You mentioned Richard Donner, which I didn't realize. Kerry Fukunaga is the first American Bond director, right, of the official Eon ones. Now, I'm curious if anyone from Casino Royale was American, but do you reckon there's a bit of American temperament? Like, yeah, we'll get an American to I'm assuming not just film it but finance it as well, and get an American director on board. And I wonder, because this is a middle finger to Eon. There's no hiding from that. This whole film, again, it's the pettiness that rises, and I respect that pettiness. As I said, I would be like that. It's it's a legal court case. It's going to go on for decades. How do you wind up the enemy? And I think going back to Octopussy, because this did open the same year, 1983. I'm not going to sit here and be ageist. I'm very curious to know what Bond fans thought heading into that year that would, I don't want to say that would have watched both, would have been at an age to understand why there are 2 films coming out the same year. And don't mean that as an insult to anybody, but there's a lot of pressure on Octopussy when you really dig deep into it. And Octopussy, I think we spoke about in our review, the fact the Bond theme is used so much by John Barry in that film, because they knew it can't be done in Never Say Never Again. They can't do the gun barrel. And there were so many restrictions to this film. It's really interesting to see how each studio had to kind of react to one another. And I just think it's a really fascinating insight into the industry. Because, again, take Bond versus Bond away, what we spoke about earlier. I'm trying to think of a time a studio is actively like rebelling against the possibilities of legal action. And I'm sure there would have been a superhero film that's done it over the past few years or something, where there was legal things of certain things. Perfect one, Solo, done it for me. Star Wars again. They had to film 80% of Solo by Ron Howard to take Phil Lord and Chris Miller's names off the directing credits, even though he directed most of it. They had to legally do things. And I think you do get that in films a lot. Zack Snyder's Justice League would have been one, I'm sure. Well, not his version, sorry. The Joss Whedon one, where because he didn't reshoot a certain amount, it was credited as a Zack Snyder directed film. And it's really interesting seeing those kind of things. But in the 80s, you don't. I mean, not just because we weren't around, but it wasn't as high profile to get things like this happening in the industry. I just think it's just incredible to get this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just having a look at the box office as well because I don't know how many months apart these came out between each other. If it was pretty much like within a month of each other, if there was like half a year or something. So Never Say Never Again, budget of 36 mil, it made 160. So, there were quids in. It did make a profit. There is that. And Octopussy was done on a budget of 27.5 mil, and that made 187.5. So that was definitely the more successful one, but established franchise, that's firing on all cylinders. It's actually kind of amazing though to see all the things that Octopussy put on screen, especially I always keep going to like the final act, but that stuff with the plane. And it was done on 27.5 mil. This was done on a budget of almost 10 mil more. And it looks so low key. Like I'm trying to think of a set piece in this film that's, dazzling or jaw dropping or anything like that.
Sean
And it just
Connery's
feels
probably wage budget's probably a part of that, maybe.
well, yeah, definitely. So I looked into that, and he said that he would come back to do it. And I can't remember what the figure was back then, but the equivalent now was 8 mil, and he wanted like a percentage of the back end. And I think he wanted to produce it or be more involved with it or something like that. He had his list of demands essentially, and he got it. I mean, of course he got it, and here he is, and it feels tired, and he looks really old. I think he was 52, his age when he did this, which is actually 3 years younger than Roger Moore was, which is incredible to me because really I don't really get a sense of his age until you hit A View to a Kill. But it was really distracting in this, when he's side by side with, Kim Basinger and, Barbara Carrera as well. It just feels really out of place. And I thought he looked old and past it in Diamonds Are Forever, let alone 12 years later coming back for this. But, he has returned for this. He is back. And I'm not going to lie, there was a sense of, it's weird for me to say nostalgia because I'm very new to the Bond franchise. But even in terms of this retrospective, like a sense of full circle, because definitely the way he plays it and in spirit, it doesn't feel like a day's passed since he was playing it back in the day. But of course it has. He's noticeably a hell of a lot older. There's just a lot more of those awkward moments, the stuff at the health spa, and it's like, it's basically a geriatric character. Yeah. I mean, they do try and work it in on the plot. Like that is a theme of the story, that it is an aging Bond who's called back into action to do this mission. But from the intro scene, like the training mission and just the stuff at the health spa, it felt awkward. It felt like at any moment he was going to fall and break his hip. And I know he's only 52 and that's not necessarily old, but he looked a kind of character like James Bond. You need someone who's fit, who's young, who's on it and can do the action that's demanded of them. And Connery wasn't really that. But then again, it was quite nice to see him back. So I don't know if for people back in the day, if this was like a sense of nostalgia for people, and that was a big draw to, go and see him play the character one more time.
Yeah, I think as well, one thing I really want to mention is that, I mean, it makes me sound horrible. Maud Adams was only 38 in Octopussy, which is very young still. Mm-hmm. But for how cinema is, and certainly the Bond franchise, they deem that an older Bond girl, which is actually ridiculous when you really look at it. Whereas I think Kim Basinger was maybe 29-ish, 30-ish when this came out. So not that that's a massive age gap between them, but having an older Roger Moore next to an older Bond girl as such, versus having old Connery next to younger Bond girl, probably looks worse. And again, there's a whole conversation we had on sort of the treatment of sort of older people in Hollywood and what they deem as old. But it's really interesting that I think that's why some of those juxtapositions work better in Octopussy, is that I've always felt that film was more aware of itself.
Yeah.
And they were in on it. We have to make the most Bond film of Bond films. It's got to be big. We've got to do this. I think obviously we spoke on the video. Roger Moore wasn't confirmed if he was coming back. They got him back for that film. And I think another podcast, I can't remember which one, did a really good discussion on the fact that, it was personal for Roger Moore. That I don't know the backlog of him and Sean Connery. If there was I know that there's a rivalry amongst the public of who was better, and that rages on today still. But back then, it was Roger versus Sean Connery. No one spoke about Lazenby. He did a film, and there were two of them. And it was the OG versus the current one. And you got to think that would have been massive for Roger Moore to have won that box office battle. But it's really interesting. But yeah, with this one, you just can't comprehend that this is on a higher budget. I'm going to say nothing in this film seems, as you said, expensive. It feels more modern purely because of some of the ludicrous decisions. And I think as well, because it's a remake of a film from the 60s, and the first Thunderball, I think, was it like the first film to shoot underwater sequences?
Mm.
Obviously, it milked it so much, and rightfully so, it was the first film to do them. Whereas in the 80s, that kind of thing's normal by now. And it means they don't have to focus on that as a thing, which I think makes it feel quicker. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything that feels groundbreaking. Again, you're looking at what, 1983? It's the same year as Return of the Jedi. You know, I think the following year is going to be like Ghostbusters Tron, I think, and all that. No, that was 82. And you're having this boom now of this sort of big stuff. And one thing, I don't know if it's sort of jumping the wrong way with this, is the whole thing's epitomized by the video game sequence.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, it was like, oh, we're in the 80s, but we're not quite in that 80s we know yet. It's still the early days, but here's them trying to talk about the future. It reminded me of the Riddler in Batman Forever in the 90s.
Yes, yeah, the battleship scene. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And it's so weird for here's Sean Connery's James Bond playing a game.
And I mean, we've seen Connery do some like, you know, corny stuff. And actually, wasn't it in Thunderball? Was it the spine stretcher? Is that from that one?
Yeah.
Is that the health spa?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's corny stuff in that and there's corny stuff in this. But I agree with that 80s scene with the video game. What's it called? I forgot what it's. Dominant.
Is it like Who Rules the World or something?
Something like that, yeah, where they get the electric shocks on the joysticks. The film, because it is almost like a direct remake of Thunderball, legally it had to be. And because you've got Connery back, your mind instantly goes back to like 60s Bond. And you know it's set in the 80s, but it feels like an old school Bond film. And then that scene just comes like right the hell out of nowhere. And it's almost like a sci-fi film at that point. This globe light comes out, this projection light. We don't even have video games like this now. Like, what the hell's this thing? It's almost like the battle plans of the Death Star come up on like a control panel. And this voiceover, and it's so over the top. You've got like the Tron grid that like comes up, and it stuck out like a sore thumb. And you get like the rules of the game briefly, but you can't really tell what's going on because there's so many lights and colors. And it was like the first time that I saw the Liar's Dice scene in Dead Man's Chest. I keep going back to this scene. I know the rules of that game now. And now when I watch it, it's a really tense and well-made scene, but I didn't know what the rules were back then. So you're watching this scene that goes on for like 5+ minutes and you can't really get invested because you don't know what's happening. And it was the same thing in this one as well. You know that Bond's going to get the better of, you know, Largo in the scene, but I didn't really understand the rules of the video game, so I couldn't tell who was winning. There's blue lights and there's red lights, and it felt like it went on for ages as well. I don't know if that was just me. This scene just went on and on and on. And, you know, actually, Octopussy, great example. That moment where, is it backgammon that he plays with Camel Khan? And he says, like, spend your money wisely, Mr. Bond. When you've got a really subtle hero villain moment like that with the one-liners and they're playing like a game of chess with each other and trying to get the better, or even like a game of poker with Casino Royale, that's way more engaging to me. And this felt like we're losing the audience's attention here. Let's have some flashy 80s special effects because it's 83. I don't know when the first video game came out. I imagine it would have been around that time, you know, early 80s. It would have been new. It would have been different. But that scene does stick out like a sore thumb to me. It just didn't feel Bond because, as you said, like it feels like a 60s Bond film kind of remade again. But with that, it's just really that one scene that just kind of sticks out. The rest of it's kind of played straight, apart from that one video game scene.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of really throws it, is that you can't... You go back to that 60s stuff, as you said, it's the remake of it, and then when they modernize it, I don't think a lot of the modernizing works. With the sequences themselves, like the action, I don't think is that well shot. So, I mean, as we said, it might be long in the first one, but it doesn't feel like you're in that. You've not got this modern action feeling. Is that because they've got an older action leader in Sean Connery? I don't know, but he went on to make better action films in the same decade. You know, Indiana Jones and Touchable.
6 years later, he was playing Harrison Ford's dad. Yeah.
Oh god, that's weird thing. And that's why I struggle with this. That it's certainly watchable, but I didn't find it too long. It didn't feel like it dragged as much, but nothing really happened that interested me. And is it because I know where it's heading? Oh, it's Domino. Yes, her brother's dead. We know. But then they try and play off some of the things you all expect, like, oh, we know that, I don't know, what's an example? Domino's brother's going to die. We know they're going to do it, so how are they going to do it differently? And every time they got to a key story point, they had to do it differently. And I don't think that worked in its favor.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why, because you don't want a carbon copy, but you kind of do. So I'm some of the scenes they do, without me looking into it, just feels different. And I want to talk about Fatima Bush, because she's one of the best things in this film. But she's meant to be Fiona Volpe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad they changed it. But we spoke before about the death. One of the most ridiculous things I think I've ever seen is the death sequence. Because it's fine she got shot. But when she blows, I'm just sat there like, what film am I watching? Like, that's so not even un-Bond-esque. I don't care about things like that. I don't know if I've ever seen that in a film before.
That's easily the most brutal
You get the
Bond death for me.
shoes. Yeah, like, you gotta think License to Kill's got the air pressure bit. You got a Live and Let Die that's got the inflatable head. I'd even argue Primo with the EMP blowing the inside of your head as well in the new one. And there's so many insane Bond deaths, but I've never seen somebody, I don't think, get blown up point blank. I'm sure someone has, but I mean, we've seen Daniel Craig get blown up like 3 times in the same film, like getting flown against doors from the graveyard to the stairs. There was something before in that film as well. I just couldn't comprehend the image, and then just the shoes being left there as well, and like Felix like chilling at the sideline, like waiting to come in. It was really odd, and I don't mind it because it was different, but it was so odd. It was like, what was the purpose of this? And I don't know.
It was my favorite bit in the whole film. That's my best scene. It got the biggest laugh out of me, but also at the same time, it was absolutely horrific. Because I think it's because you just see it point blank. It's not like the camera cuts away or anything. It's not even like it was a cinematic explosion. It genuinely looked like a suicide bomber. Like, it looked like a real goddamn explosion. And I don't know if tonally it matched with the film or not, because up until that point, it was quite like a campy, Sean Connery, James Bond adventure. You would have never had anything like that back in the days of Connery. And I know that, early Connery was a bit more brutal. Well, actually, saying that, someone gets burned alive by the dragon in Doctor No, don't they? So I don't know. Maybe Bond has gone that brutal before. But it was, like the comedy dart, like the Q's giving him this pen that shoots out the dart, and then it's like boom. Oh my god! And you're right, the shoes. You see body parts flying everywhere. Oh, no gore, but it doesn't have to. Like, it caught me off guard. But I absolutely loved her character, Fatima Blush, Barbara Carrera. I think she was nominated for a Golden Globe for the role in this. I can't remember who she lost to, though. It escapes me now, but she was brilliant, and she kind of was giving me Xenia Onatopp energy a little bit. Obviously, that character is very different, but this character here who's got a complete, superiority complex, narcissism. She wants him to physically write down that she was the best sexual partner that James Bond's ever had, and it's just the extreme lengths that she goes to. You've got the ballroom dance scene as well, and she clocks that he's dancing with someone else, and she's like this diva, this prima donna walking down the stairs like, I'm having none of this. I thought it was a really cool angle to go with a character, and don't get me wrong, I still do prefer Fiona Volpe overall, but she just looked like she was having a lot of fun, and she had real personality, and just how unhinged she was. That at the very end where the dart hits her, and she just starts maniacally, like her face isn't moving, and she's just letting out this really creepy laugh. I don't know, there was just so much personality to her character, and I think easily she kind of stole the limelight for me in terms of the villains. I don't really have much to say on Largo himself. Klaus Maria Brandauer. It's a French name. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. I think Connery personally requested him after seeing him in a few films, but you got the crazy one-eyed pirate, haven't you, in Thunderball? And we didn't like the villain in that film, but at least I remember that, and I remember the hokey fight at the end with at the helm with the wheel and all that stuff. And it's crap. It's absolutely crap, but I remember it. This guy, he wasn't intimidating. You know what I'd equate this villain to? He reminds me of Dominic Green from Quantum of Solace. That kind of
like a henchman.
Villain.
He was like a henchman for some reason. The villain. He reminded me of not Boris. What's his name from Die Another Day? He's like, boss. He beat your time. The one.
Yeah. I know exactly who you're talking about.
He looked like him as well. And then it's there like, oh wait, his girlfriend's Kim Basinger, and you're like, what?
He's
I
batting
mean,
above his average there, isn't he? Let's be fair. But then again, so is Sean Connery. Let's be honest at this point.
yeah, and it does make me think of Batman. I think it's she in Batman. She Vicky Vale.
Yeah, with Michael
Good, got
Keaton.
that bit
Yeah.
right. And that's why it's really weird to see her pre 1989. And yeah, it was so weird. The whole thing was like, let's get 80s, let's get her dancing to 80s music and him being a perv in the wall behind. And I was just kind of there, like, I understand, like, again, there's some really big 80s tropes. Again, it's early 80s, but you know what decade you're in, but you're not quite there yet. And then at the same time, it feels like it's from the 60s because it's doing film from the 60s. And even like some people like Blofeld in it. There's Max von Sydow as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like,
I didn't know that. That caught me off guard. I thought that was inspired casting. He was great. And he's not in the film a
yeah.
lot, but
And
so
it's a
good.
shame because he's the kind of actor that, would have probably actually ended up in a Bond film at some point had he not done Never Never Again, which is a massive shame when you look at that. And again, I don't want to say missed opportunity because, they legally couldn't use Blofeld, right, in any Bond film after anyway. But it's just so odd that they were able to get like some names like that. And then, like, of course, someone that we're going to be talking about very soon as well, with Rowan Atkinson popping up in his first ever film. And it's just so
What's
weird.
his first ever film?
I believe it's his first ever film. And
that's going to blow my mind.
It's just incredible that this, again, I can't quite put my mind on what on earth happened. Like, is some of this stuff genius or is it just sheer insanity? I think it's a blend of both, and I don't really understand why, but Never Again, it just doesn't. I don't know. I'm kind of lost with it because I can't really. I'm in this weird state of limbo with it. I just don't know how this is a film. Not in a bad. I don't mean that in a bad way as well, if that makes sense.
It just feels a bit awkward. Like, it's not saying it's dead on arrival, but it's awkwardly on arrival, if that's any way of kind of saying it. And even now, after seeing the film, it is just that it just feels like a lot of unfortunate circumstances, really, doesn't it, surrounding the film? And if you've had like a franchise that's been going on for 2 decades straight now at this point, success after success with all of their films, and their oh god, I don't even know what number film Octopussy was. Let me have a check real quick. 13 films deep into the franchise. That's why I said, like, is it a little too late? I know there's been all those legal battles and everything, the decade injunction thing, and then not being able to get it off the ground in the 70s, but the 80s didn't feel like the time to do it. It felt like if you were going to do it, if you could do it, the time was to do it either in the 60s, which obviously you couldn't, or if you couldn't get it done in the 70s, just knock it on the head. Other side characters. Oh, actually, going back to the Max von Sydow thing as Blofeld, it's such a shame because he's such a great actor and he has real presence as Blofeld. And I kind of wish he had been in a main Bond film now. Seeing him play the character in this, I would have loved to have got even more scenes of him, because I know that's the whole point of Blofeld. He's always in the shadows, but he's maybe in 2 scenes in this film, 3 at a push. But they did keep the white cat, which isn't a thing for the character in the books. That is a thing that Eon started with the character of having the white cat. So, they couldn't use much else. I don't think they could use a title sequence. I don't know what was stopping them from doing a title sequence. That doesn't seem a thing that's intrinsically linked to James Bond. I know it is with like a main song, but the point is other films have title sequences with songs at the beginning. So I don't know if that was a parameter of Bond, but this film doesn't have one of those. It doesn't have many of the elements of Bond, and there's certain things they couldn't use. You do have returning characters, M and Q's in there. You have a Miss Moneypenny as well. And of course, Felix Leiter, played by Bernie Casey as well. I actually didn't mind Felix in this film. I thought he was kind of cool. You read into it though, and he was literally just cast because of the color of his skin. It was like, if we have a Felix, we need an actor where he's going to be memorable. Let's get the black actor in, and you can read that, and that was the reason that they cast him. And I mean, having no knowledge about this film, I didn't realize that was the case. I thought we had our first black Felix Leiter once we got to Casino Royale with Jeffrey Wright, who was obviously incredible. But I really liked him in this. The only problem is that we've got Connery, and I don't feel like the two have that chemistry there with each other, probably because Connery is about 20 years too old to play the character at this point.
I thought you were going to say something else about what Connery is, but I'm not going to say. No. Yeah, no, I quite liked him, and yeah, it feels like it does feel like tokenism when you say that as well. And I'm not saying it is, but it probably is for the era they're in, as it's very Americanized. But I've kind of said this, that we had a chat before about Felix Leiters and stuff. I know that really 007 was just an episode on it, but the character of Felix, I kind of laughed, I was like, let's just take a white American guy with slightly long hair, put some sunglasses on him, stick him in a suit, give him an American accent, and that's just like a bog standard Felix Leiter you get in these Bond films. And it's always been the way for me until 2006. And I will never say ever again, it doesn't really count, it's not official. But at least it felt like it was a bit different and he seemed more interesting. And obviously, Jeffrey Wright has just, to me, come in and defined what it is to be that character and actually give the character a story arc and so many other wonderful things. Jeffrey Wright's a fantastic actor. And yeah, I quite liked him. It's one of the things actually I like the most. I think him and Blofeld are right up there, Fatima Bush. And I don't want to say Connery because that sounds really unfair on him, but you know, it's a Connery Bond film, but it's not a Connery Bond film like I'm ever in a. You're never gonna see me put this on again, probably for many, many years. I think it's one of them with him where again, it's so obvious it's the middle finger to Eon. You know what I'm like. Obviously, we've known each other for years and stuff. I always get funny about official versus not official stuff.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Even like stuff like Star Wars, I don't watch the originals because not that it's not current. I know they were a thing, but you know, until they are released properly, if that ever does happen again, I've got no issues sticking on what they already released. So it's a really interesting thing with things like this. But again, it's just, you know, it'd be like if George Lucas made A New Hope tomorrow and just released it, and you'd be like, "What? Like, you know, is that legal? Like, new actors and but then
make it legal."
Yeah, and it's such a weird comprehension thing for this, but it's just so strange. The accumulation of this film, I still can't quite put my words on it because it's just a remake of a, and it's not even that long ago. It's what 18 years before Thunderball. You think how many films were 18 years ago are getting remade this year? Like it'd be like the New Lord of the Rings film coming out today. Not today. The Return of the King. Like imagine just the comprehension of 18 years is nothing. But the supporting cast here, there's some great stuff, some bad stuff. I want to talk about music as well because I know this is mainly your section. There is a theme at the end.
There is. It's got quite an interesting story, the music around this film, actually. So we'll start off with the score. So according to Irving Kershner and the producer, Schwartzman, they wanted to get James Horner, who's actually probably in my top 3 favorite composers of all time. Because of his work on Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, they were really impressed by that. They wanted to do it. But he only worked predominantly from London, and they couldn't get it to work, and they couldn't get him. And then actually, we didn't talk about the writing for the film as well. So there's loads of Bond people. Actually, I think we did mention this. There's loads of people tied to the Eon films that they reached out to try and get their involvement on this film. One of them being Tom Mankiewicz, the writer of, I think he wrote a bunch of them, didn't he? It was Live and Daylights. Live and Let Die, wasn't it? And some of those like 70s ones, maybe some of the 60s ones, I'm not sure. He did a whole bunch of them. They reached out to him, but there was that undying loyalty there to Eon and to, you know, Cubby Broccoli. And that was also the case of the music as well. So they did reach out to John Barry. Could you imagine the gall of that, to reach out to arguably like the Bond composer? You come and do this little James Bond side project we're doing. And again, he declined out of loyalty to Eon and probably to save himself any future legal issues if it ever amounted to, especially, you know, surrounding this film. This film was kind of bad news. You didn't want to be tied to it. Eventually they got Michael Legrand to do the score. And honestly, this is one of the most forgettable scores I think I've seen to the film. Feels very understated. It feels weird not having the Bond theme. I know they can't. I know the reasons behind that. But even then, just as a score, it's just like, not that there's much action in this film, but nothing hits. Nothing's memorable. Nothing punches. And it's really frustrating. Actually, there's a whole bunch of edits you can see on YouTube, only like short ones that people have done, where they've put the John Barry score over the top and it completely transforms the scenes, as it obviously would. That is the Bond music that you associate. This is just kind of a crappy situation. And actually, there was kind of legal dispute with the music as well, which takes us on to the main theme. So the main theme, Never Say Never Again, was originally offered to Bonnie Tyler, but she apparently hated the song, so declined. You know, fair play to good old Bonnie there. It was given to Lani Hall, and that's the one that you hear at the beginning and the end of the film. As a song, it's fine, but there was an alternate song that was made for it, which was originally going to be the theme. So that previous one, Lani Hall's, was presided over by the composer himself. But Phyllis Hyman did a score for it as well, Never Say Never Again, which you can hear on Spotify. You can find it on YouTube. And that was written by Stephen Forsyth and Jim Ryan, which apparently she did in one take. There's a quote from Stephen Forsyth. He says, "I played the song once to her as she was having breakfast. As she came in later, she recorded it in one take, having only listened to the song once, and absolutely nailed it." And tragically, she actually took her own life in the mid-90s. She had a history with bipolar and depression, but she called or wrote to the guy she did the song with, saying that that was the best sort of like recording she'd ever done. And, she was really proud of it. But the composer, Michael Legrand, exercised something in his contract saying that getting someone else to do the song broke contractual obligations, that he got to be, the emperor of all the music in the film. He got final say on everything, on the score and the theme. And for them to go out and get someone else to record a song that wasn't even presided over by him was against his contract. So unfortunately, they had to turf Phyllis Hyman's song out, and we get the one that we hear in the film. And honestly, if you hear two songs back to back, Phyllis's is a Bond song. That, to me, if you are going to include it in like all of your main Eon Bond themes, it's right up there for me. Absolute powerhouse vocal. It's almost kind of going towards that Shirley Bassey or Gladys Knight kind of feel, in my opinion, with the song. It's fantastic, and it would have been a much better song, I think, for the film overall. But then again, you still wouldn't have had a title screen for the music to go with it, so I don't know if it would have had that the impact that it did. But I mean, it's a great song. Go check it out.
Legally, they probably could have done a pre-title sequence.
Yeah,
but they probably. Yeah, I think that was them choosing not to. Like, we're not doing a gun barrel. We're not doing a theme. We want to be different. Again, stick the middle finger up. This is how we're doing it. And, something that I think could have worked better, but I completely understand why. The song is, I didn't mind the song in it. You know me, the music section is not my forte. I didn't hang around after the credits. It was one of them where it was, time
I've
to
watched this film with the review. Like, let's turn it off now. We're done.
Yeah,
that's 10 minutes. I'm never getting back.
Yeah, I mean, Casino Royale actually sticks around until the animations were at least done, which was the politest thing I could say. But for this one, it was, I think it was like 1 a.m. on Friday. I finished this film because I didn't realize how long it was. So, it was one of them, and I kind of want to use that to sort of merge into the next part of this. Is there anything else we need to add about the music, which is the usual best or worst scenes?
I know my worst, not counting the video game scene. I think my worst scene's probably the awkward horse jump off the prison tower thing. Do you remember that scene? Like, they get caught up in like that sort of like Arabic castle thing where Kim Basinger's being sold off to the highest bidder, and he comes in on horseback to rescue her, and then they do the scene. Oh, you haven't seen it. There's a scene in Braveheart where he's in like this, he's surrounded by water, and he has to launch a horse with him on it, like off the tower, which kills the horse, but it gets him out of the situation. Obviously, I know that came out in 95, so this one technically did it first, but there is one of the ropiest blue screens / green screens I've ever seen in my life, and it's the reaction shot of Sean Connery and Kim Basinger on that horse as it's about to go over into the jump. And then, which was it on Her Majesty's Secret Service with the skier that goes off the cliff, and it's like the little action figure.
Never Stops, yeah.
Is it from that film? Yeah. There's the equivalent of that in this film, and this film came out like 20 years later, and it's the horse jump, and it pulls back to a wide shot, and there's like this little miniature figure of a horse that's not even moving, and it's quite clearly an action figure, and they linger on it just a little bit too long. It just stuck out like a sore thumb to me. I thought it was terrible. So if I was going to pick a worse scene other than the video game scene, it would probably be that one. Best scene, we've already mentioned it, the bit where Fatima blows up. I thought that was both horrific and hilarious at the same time. So they'd be my favorite scenes.
Yeah, definitely Fatima getting blown up. I think it was just so out there and so different. Worst scene, I'm going to go the game thing, just because, again, it's not my thing. So, what is a Bond film? I don't want to ever see a James Bond play video games. I'm happy to play video games of James Bond, but the last thing I want to see is Daniel Craig step into a room with Freddie Mercury and save the world by beating him, on the game of battleships, and it's just so not right. For not even the character, because this technically isn't the character in truth, but it's just something that shouldn't ever happen. He goes to the only games I want to see is him in a casino winning poker games. For for actual proper things, not playing with a joystick. It's too much. It's too weird. So that's just on there for its basic principles. I actually quite enjoyed the water fight this time. Now, whether it's because it's short and to the point, holds it up in higher esteem, I don't know. But it's hard because some scenes, again, it's remaking the 60s one, and some scenes do it worse, some scenes might do things better, and that's where I'm torn, because am I going in to look at scenes differently? Like the whole, the ship's going, I don't think, and don't know near as good. The subplot with the brother, I think, was so much better in the original Thunderball compared to this one. In fact, this one's like a jumped up. He's like, what's his name? Thingybob from South Park, like Tweak, like always like tweaking and everything like that. And whereas the other one is just, he's got a bandage on his head. He's suave, he's swagger. He's going to get killed because it's the brother. But yeah, the scene stuff's weird, and I don't mind them doing stuff differently. But obviously, they can come out again. They didn't never seem to come out the same. It was all, each scene was either worse or better, never really on par. But overall, I felt the film was on par with Thunderball. It's such a weird analogy.
I'm trying to think of another good scene that I really liked. Actually, was the fist fight at the health spa. I think the character's called Lipe. He's played by Pat Roach. He was in all 3 of the Indiana Jones films. I think he was the guy who he fights, next to the plane in Raiders of the Lost Ark, like the big boxer guy. I think in Temple of Doom, he played the guy, I think it's the guy on the conveyor belt that gets crushed that he fights with. And then I can't remember, I think he plays like one of the, like the Gestapo or something in Last Crusade, I think. But I thought that was a really good fight scene right up until the end. And then I don't know if it was the editing. I don't know if I missed something. I didn't understand the way that he was killed. They're throwing each other around in like this sort of like chemical part. There's loads of like beakers and acids and all stuff like that.
Throws it on his face.
Throws his piss in his face. And then he dies from it. But then when he falls down, it looks like he's got loads of broken glass in his back. So I don't know if that was what killed him. But I was like, Jesus Christ, is like James Bond's urine so potent that it can kill a man? Like, I don't know. It was a really weird end to the fight. It ended so abruptly for me.
It was rushed. It was like a rushed ending. I like the bit when they're like fighting down the corridor, and I think they're like watching something on the TV, or there's like some game show on, and they're like, try and do a polite walk whilst they're fighting.
Yeah,
I love it when action scenes do that. Like I always think of John Wick 2 when they're like at the subway station just trying to shoot each other with silencers. I love that kind of let's make a fight look casual. And then if you've ever seen The Other Guys, there's like a fight at a funeral and they're all whispering, and then like the relative comes by and they all stand up and like say, sorry for your loss, and they start like whispering, fighting on the floor after again. It's just scenes like that. It's just really well done. And again, it's like they've got to differ it up from Thunderball, and they want to make the health spa stuff funnier, be a bit different, a bit more modern. And the health spa bit was all right. There was no weird device to go back and forth again, which was so weird when you think about it. Still, no awkwardly rape scenes with that girl. I know there was a hot topic a month ago to some people because of what Fukunaga said. I think that's something blown out of proportion.
I think they're reaching a little bit there for it.
Of course,
yeah.
It's just one of them. I think that the health spa stuff made it easier. And I think when Thunderball starts off so slow, it makes it so much harder to really get into it after. Whereas this one starts quicker and then gets slower as it progresses, as you get introduced to characters later on. And I think some of it worked in its favor, some of it didn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This film did have some good one-liners, though. And in all honesty, like I forgot to do the whole one-liner thing because that felt like something that we were doing during the retrospective. But with Connery coming back, I felt like we absolutely had to. So there were a million more that I could have written down because it felt like every line was a one-liner in some way. Let me see which would be my favorite. Okay, so first off, it's when she's asking for the urine sample at the health spa. She said, "I'd like you to fill this beaker for me." And he's like, "What, from here?" And he's like halfway across the room. I just thought that was funny. The bit where he's in bed with I can't remember who he's with. I don't know if it's his contact. I can't remember. She says, and he says, "I think we made the right decision about your place or mine." And it's when the bomb goes off in the opposite apartment. But I thought this was good and kind of sums Bond up. I think she says to him, like, "I made you all wet," and he says, "Yes, but my martini is still dry." And I thought that was great. "But my martini is still dry," as he says it. There's loads more I could have written down, but those are the ones that stuck out to me. I don't know if you did one-liners. I don't know if there's any other memorable lines.
I was zoned off the one-liners just because it's
That's
I'm
fine. Yeah,
prepping still for
yeah,
next. I'm still prepping for next week, but
yeah,
the
yeah.
hotel room one did get a slight chuckle out of me
Mhm.
because it's just a smart way of doing it, and it's very Connery. I don't think any of the Bonds could have sort of delivered that properly.
Mhm.
Maybe Roger Moore would have been a bit too comedy-esque and Daniel Craig a bit too serious, but I think Connery's the right Bond you want on the end for a one-on. Maybe a Brosnan, who knows?
Mhm.
But
There's a nice bit of
yeah,
fourth wall breaking at the end, isn't there, for the final shot? I'll probably have that up as like one of the gifs for the socials for this thing. But the very end where he's making out with Kim Basinger and then he looks at the camera and winks and it goes into the 007. It's very cheesy, but it's a nice sign off, I think, for Sean Connery and his tenure as James Bond. Even if you count this as a James Bond outing, which I guess you
his
kind of have
third
to, but
his third final James Bond performance, I
yes,
guess we can call it. I think that's a term I've seen thrown around a lot recently, but no, it's an interesting one. I'd say that brings into final thoughts, but
hmm
I overall, I've been a bit quiet on this. I don't think it's as again, I'm quite neutral. I think let's say a hypothetical ranking of 27, because we've done 25 basically. This just sits in like 2/3 down, like it's maybe 3/4 down. It's not by all means the worst thing in Bond. Yeah, the whole
hmm
thing's an insult and a middle finger. That's fine. That discredits so much of it, but the craft isn't that bad. There are some bad bits. There are some really good bits. And again, I'd probably just slap it on par with the original Thunderball. It
hmm
doesn't feel too not dissimilar from it, but as far as a remake goes, it doesn't improve upon the remake, but I don't think it makes it worse either. And I
hmm
think that's a really rare thing because remakes tend to go one or the other way, but that is quite neutral. I think it's a really interesting topic. But again, I think the big takeaway for this one for me is that there is, had I been like, not that I'm going to be doing a master's or anything like that, but this is the kind of thing I'd love to do a case study on.
hmm
If I like had to write like a 10,000 word essay on something, like this Noctopussy would just be such a fascinating ordeal. And I think it'd be one in the future that maybe, again, I said I won't watch it for many years. The next time I watch this, it'll probably either be a double bill of Octopussy or a double bill with Thunderball. I
hmm
don't know which one I'd rather watch with it because it'd be fascinating either way.
I think it'd be tough doing it with Thunderball because Thunderball is very slow, isn't it? And I mean, this film has its slow moments. That being said, I do find this film, from pacing wise, much more easier to watch than Thunderball. I think I've seen Thunderball a grand total of twice now. I watched it once before we did the retrospective, but I'd be lying if I said that I'm already forgetting this film. And I watched it earlier today. There's no sort of standout set piece. We've mentioned like the health spa and everything. There's a cool fist fight there. And I guess the video game sequence is memorable. It's probably memorable for the wrong
The wrong
reasons, though. But
reasons.
certainly, like
Yeah.
the end of the film, it's like a blur that they're in that sort of like Arabic prison, and then there's like a bit underground, and then you kind of tee it off with like a little bit of an underwater scuffle. And I'm not saying I wanted more underwater scenes. I'm not saying that, but at least with Thunderball, you go, it's the underwater one, and there's
Yeah.
it's that kind of defines the film. The ending, as cheesy as it is, and it almost feels like a 60s Batman adventure, like TV episode, it's memorable to me. The villain, the look, Fiona Volpe, I think that Thunderball has a lot more going for it. And the fact, going back to that talk of, canon, non-canon, official, unofficial, it is the official Eon Bond. You've got the Barry soundtrack to accompany it as well. So I think that Thunderball's got more staying power, but this film wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. But it is totally middle of the road for me. It's so average. It's so mediocre. And this is what I say, like Kevin McClory had a dream. And, eventually it led to Never Say Never Again. So take it for what you will. It's a nice little bit of Bond content. I'm glad that we've covered it and talked about it because, we're kind of going for completion, aren't we? Or a sense of completion. We're not doing that TV special probably, at least, unless,
No.
we want to come back to the Bond stuff in a year's time and mine to see what else, what other Bond content that we can mine from it. But it was fine. If anything, it's another 80s movie I can cross off my list, get another one ticked off. So I guess I'll do it for our thoughts on Never Say Never Again. So, of course, this is where we pass over to you guys. Hopefully you've been commenting along. Or if you haven't, maybe you're discovering this after after it's gone up. Let us know what you think of this film. Do you think it's awful? Are you middle of the road on it? Or do you think it's a guilty pleasure? Or maybe you just really like the film. Anything regarding this or James Bond? Because it's still tied to James Bond. Connery's tenure as Bond. Anything. We love reading your comments and we reply to everyone. So please do be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. So that kind of covers the Bond content. So for the next few weeks, we're having a little bit of fun. And we've wanted to do this since we started Doctor No, pretty much from those earlier few Bond reviews. and we're finally getting to do it. So next week, it's going to be exactly the same time, Tuesday at 8 p.m. We're going to be talking about Austin Powers International Man of Mystery, and we're going to be starting the Austin Powers trilogy. I can't wait for that. It's been so nice going through these films and seeing the similarities, but it's been years since I've watched that first one, at least. Spy Who Shagged Me, I've watched loads of times. I watched that, I think, about 2 years ago, but this first one especially, it's been a while, so I think we're both ready for that one, aren't we? We need a bit of a laugh, I think. It'll be nice.
Yeah, there's been so many, we've revisited so many franchises this year, and with Bond, it's the, Casino Royale and everything again. It's like doing a bit of homework, isn't it? It's the after, it's like an epilogue, whereas this is the, it's all the serious shit's done and dusted now. Now it's time for the fun ones, the enjoyable ones. We've got the three Austin Powers films and Johnny English, which is just going to add a whole new dimension to it, and a lot of other stuff coming. So do join us on that. I'm so excited for it. I've even got a story to tell about Vern Troyer. I think I told you the convention one before.
Yeah, you have. It's great.
Which is it's going to be amazing. So that is one to talk about. The next 3 weeks is going to be so much fun. It's going to be very different, but the fact as well, they're hour and a half long films. Hooray!
It's going to be nice.
Nothing too long. And also on the channel, so we've got a lot of things happening. We're building up to something happening in December, which is a much better setting coming out of Chris than it is from me for obvious reasons. This Thursday is Meet the Feebles review, for those that aren't aware.
Yeah, we've started the Peter Jackson month, the Peter Rabbit. Jesus Christ, I've been talking for too long. Peter Jackson retrospective. There is a rabbit in Meet the Feebles. That's where my mind just went to there. It was his second feature film. It looks absolutely insane. I still actually haven't watched the film, but we will be reviewing that. It's going to be me and Tate on that one this upcoming Thursday, 4th of November. I think that's going to be 10 p.m. again. That one at a slightly later time. And yeah, we're building up to a big trilogy of films, which I think I even announced on the last video. Like, you can't keep it coy. There's no way to keep that. We're talking about Peter Jackson. Where do you think it's going to lead to for the month of December? But it's really interesting. We haven't seen all of his earlier films, so it's educational. It's crossing more films off the list. And I think Meet the Feebles is definitely one of the ones that is the most bizarre, near the mark, disgusting, all of those good things that we love from movies. So check out that one if you're a Peter Jackson fan, or if you just want to hear our opinions on it. On top of that, we have a schedule. We have an Excel spreadsheet. We have a spreadsheet, a schedule of all the content that's going to be coming up for the rest of this year. And it's going to be absolutely heaving. It's actually kind of scary in a way. There's a lot of pressure on us. And I think by the time we get to January, we'll need a damn good rest after all the videos we've got coming out, but it's going to be great. So once again, find us on all of our socials. They're going across the bottom of the screen right there. Twitter at cinema_savvy, facebook.com/cinemasavvy, and exactly the same for Letterboxd as well. You're going to need Letterboxd probably as well to keep up to date and to keep track of everything we've got coming out over the next couple of months. So this has been a really fun one. So until the next video, guys, we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.